Last year I did some videos where I played one guitar through loads of amps, you know, like 9, 10, 11, 12 amps. Those videos were pretty mammoth to make and also to watch, I'd imagine. They were quite successful, but I thought, why don't I break it down into smaller amounts of amps? It might just be easier to digest and to sort of talk about and compare things. So this sort of video, I'm hoping to do quite a few of them, changing around the amps and also just changing the guitar and keeping the same 4 amps, which is probably what I'll do for the next few weeks. But today we're using one of my favorite guitars. This is a Gibson Customshop 64 Reissue SG in TV Gold. And if you've watched my channel for a long time, you'll remember this is the one I bought at Peach a couple of years ago when I went a bit mad at Peach. But the guitar's changed a little bit since then. At the moment, I've changed the bridge. It doesn't have the nylon saddles that come with this sort of guitar. I've put in a bridge from a different Gibson with the standard sort of metal saddles, and then I changed the pickups. I took the custom buckers out and I put in a set of Sunbear PAFs. These are the 59 PAFs. Today though, we're only using the bridge position. And I want these videos to be quite specific like that. You know, if we start comparing too many things, it gets confusing, it gets longer. I'd rather just make videos in different sort of positions and things. So let me see how this goes. Right, let's have a look at what amps we've got today. Okay, to start with, we've got my vintage 1967 Super Reverb. This had been on the channel before, but it wasn't sounding great. There was something wrong with it, and in those amp comparisons, I always used to say there's something wrong, and I'd often play it through a different cabinet. I had it sent off a service at Sweet Amps in East London, and he had a look and discovered that all 4 speakers had a problem. So I spent a fair amount of money getting each of the 4 of them sort of serviced, whether some of them had reconed or repapering, and then he just looked through the amp and changed a couple of things that needed changing. But it sounds so much better. I'm loving this amp. It's loud, it's clean, it's got a massive reverb, and you're not going to hear everything obviously in one video with it, but I'll be planning more videos about this Super Reverb. The next amp is the Rift Aynsley Lister Signature, which again, if you've been on the channel for long, you'll know that I'm a big fan of this amp. Now, this is probably the odd one out. The other 3 are more clean types. This is more of a Marshall type. If you don't know, Rift is a small boutique amp maker here in the UK, and this is the Aynsley Lister Signature. Aynsley is a blues guitarist, and this is based on an old Marshall combo that Aynsley had with reverb, and this has a preamp section and a master volume, unlike a couple of the amps. And well, you'll hear it in a minute. It's got a bit more overdrive to it, although I'll talk about how I've set it when we look a bit closer. Okay, then the next one is the Bartel Starwood. Bartel is Mark Bartel, who made Tone King amps before he sold them. Now he makes individual, you know, sort of what I would say were master built amps. He builds the cabinets, he covers them himself with the tweed or the Tolex, you know, your hand wires, everything, and they're unique designs to him. I'm going to have this only in one setting today. It's the tweed setting, so to speak, and you'll hear that. It's got a very vintage sound, not too much overdrive, but a bit of bite to it. And then lastly, really fun amp, the Magnatone Twilighter. Now, I'm a big fan of this amp. I used to have the stereo version. I say used to, I only had it for 2 days and it broke my ears. So I sent that back, but I ended up later getting this mono version, which is a 22 watt amp. I should have said before, a Super Reverb is 45 watts. The Rift AL is maybe 35 watts. The Starwood is 28 watts and this is 22 watts. It's the cleanest one. I played it with 2 different volumes actually because I was being a bit cautious, and then I turned it up nearer the end, but I'll show you what I mean at the time. So why don't we start hearing a bit of them one after the other, and I'll just jump in when I need to As I said, we're sticking with one position, the bridge position of this guitar, and the tone is about halfway down. Okay, the Super Reverb. It's obviously one of the most famous amps ever made, and I always wanted a black panel sort of era one, and this one came up as a pretty good deal, although now I've spent quite a lot of money fixing it up. I guess it's about right. But these are not as expensive as you'd think, really. It cost me about £2.5 grand, and that includes a second cabinet with a 2x12 setup that I can put the chassis in. Then I've just spent about 650 quid getting this fixed up. So early 3000s, about the same price as the Magnatone Twilighter. And I guess it's because these are huge and loud and not the easiest things to gig these days. I have to say, having this morning recorded some stuff with this amp at the lowest possible volumes it can do all the way up to the loudest, which I'll show you in another video, it's actually more versatile than you think. It is still heavy. You can't get away from that. It's a 4x10. It's big and wide. It's got tremolo and reverb, so it's got a lot of glass. But okay, with a humbucker. Now, you know, you might sort of think of this amp as a Stevie Ray Vaughan amp and tube screamers and strats and that sort of thing. But I love a black panel Fender amp with a humbucker and pushed a bit. It just has this sort of granular quality as it sort of like peaks the reverb quite a lot. Now the reverb is on number 3 here, which is plenty. I mean, I'll do a standalone video, of course, with this amp. I'll show you what it's like at 7 or 10 or something. Mad, it's mad. It's very, very reverby. But I wanted that. I wanted to splash the reverb as I hit. And these Fender amps are always so touch dynamic and responsive. I know that's a term that the boutique amp makers like to use, but really these Fender amps have all of that. Now, people say that the sweet volume point on these Fender amps is 6. 6 does sound good, 7 sounds even better, potentially, depending on what you want. It's on 7. I've played this amp at 8, 9 and 10, and with a Strat I will do, and I'll roll the volume back a bit. But 7's plenty loud, I can tell you that. And loudness is one thing. Loudness mixed with a large, splashy, springy reverb is another thing, and your ears can get a little bit, yeah, you've got to be careful. But it is addictive. Anyway, I pushed the mids up to 6 or 7, pulled the bass down a little bit, and I just wanted to give it that sort of, well, the character I like. I wouldn't call it overdrive as such, it's on the edge, but there's something brash and loud about it, and I probably wouldn't be able to play this live anywhere that I could play. I'm going to do some videos soon with the Super Reverb, seeing what pedals can give a similar quality with the volume at a low level. But yeah, I was really excited by that sound, and I wanted to see how it compared to the Rift, which is a completely different type of amp. So let's hear that for a second. Okay, the earlier clip you'd heard of the Rift right at the beginning of the video, I think I probably had it in its default setting. That is with the bright switch on. But you pull the preamp out and it takes that out, but it also lowers the output quite a lot. And I think I ended up with that. On hearing the recordings, maybe I should have kept it in. I thought it was a bit bright in the room, but in the recording it sounded right with the bright switch on. I know Aynsley pretty much never pulls that switch out, so he's always got the bright switch on. Well, I had the preamp up really high. I wanted to get a more overdriven character with this, but what I like about this amp is, even though it is Marshall based, it's not completely hot rod, if you see what I mean. Like, with the choice of speaker, the Eminence Governor, there's just a lot of clarity. And even with this pickup on the bridge, on 10 volume, it didn't just overdrive smoothly, right? You still get that dynamic feeling and the stabs that you can do. And part of that, again, is the reverb. It interacts with the reverb really nicely. Yeah, I liked both amps, really. I would be hard pushed to choose between them in that sense. The Super Reverb's a little bit bigger, but not as much bigger as you'd think. The cabinet of the Rift AL is a really interesting size. It's quite tall, but not deep. And it projects the sound in a way that, yeah, it always fills the room massively. Like if I'm sitting in here and hearing someone else play it, I'm just like, whoa, where's that sound coming from? It's a bit like the Super Reverb. So yeah, I enjoyed that. Probably a bit more overdrive than I would want ultimately. I think I would have the bright switch in, but pull the preamp back a bit next time and go a bit cleaner. And the master was only on like 2 or 2.5, so that tells you how loud this amp can be. And just for your own sort of, well, I guess that these first two amps have been around 110 decibels. But that would be right in front of the amp where I'm sitting. You know, probably 10 or 15 foot away, they'd be 102 or 3, which is more palatable. Okay, let's hear the Bartel Starwood. I struggle to get this amp as hot as the Rift, which is understandable, right? The Rift is more powerful and it's hotter. So coming to the Starwood from that, for a minute, it took a minute for me to sort of readjust. But this is tweed levels of overdrive, you know, which actually, if I'd started with that, my ear would have been tuned into that and I'd probably loved that the most. You know, this sort of mid-50s era sound is lovely. This has a Fane A60 speaker in the back, which I like. I'd be interested in trying some other speakers in here though. It's one of the last few rabbit holes I've never been down, changing speakers. So it might be one I try on this amp, or just an aside, I've got a vintage deluxe reverb that I'm having worked on because it was not working properly. And it's got a JBL, an old JBL speaker in, so it's really hi-fi. So I'll probably change it to something less hi-fi and keep the JBL for when if I sell it and someone wants it. So that would be a good time for me to check out speakers. Anyway, with this amp, you've got a preamp volume, which I set quite high, about 7.5, and then a master volume, which I had at about 8. And it really isn't as loud as either of the two other amps, but of course it is smaller. I always wonder with this amp, whether it's loud enough to go unmiked in a bigger venue. I'm not sure. I don't think it would be. I feel like there could be a bit more oomph. But if you go for the bigger Bartel, which is 45 watts, the Roseland, it's a 6L6 amp as opposed to a 6V6, and I just prefer the feeling and sound of this. It's more gritty, more tweedy, more bitey. It's lovely. It's really lovely, and it's great recorded. You can hear there's a lot of clarity, there's not a lot of overdrive, but there is just that dynamic spikiness that you get of this sort of tweed amp. I'm not sure I'd pick it over the other two for the sound I'm going for here, but I really enjoyed that. Okay, the Magnatone. I've not used this Magnatone a lot on the channel. I don't know why. I've had it for quite a long time. I think I did a couple of videos at the beginning with the louder one, the stereo, and that blew my mind. But honestly, I often plug it in, even when I was doing those big amp comparison videos, and get left thinking, wow, this might be my favourite amp in here for what sounds I'm going for. It has this sort of almost swampy character to it. As a clean amp, it's got more bright chime than a Fender, but it's not like a Vox or a Marshall. It's its own thing. It sparkles, it chimes, but it also has this Americana feel to it, the grittiness. The reverb is massive. And you'll hear the tremolo a little bit in this, and this is more like a harmonic tremolo that I've put on. This is the more unusual of its two tremolos. It's got the standard sort of tremolo, and then this is the more unusual one. Now, this amp is pretty loud, and it stays clean for quite a lot of its volume sweep. I started with the volume on about half or just under half, and the bass and treble was quite low. And I like the bass and treble controls on here. Unlike the other, unlike the Super Reverb and the Rift, it doesn't have a mid control. And the Bartel is a whole other kettle of fish because it doesn't do what you'd expect with its controls, which you'll know if you see my other videos. This Magnatone really only gives you a very usable amount of bass or treble, whether you set them extremely or not. Whereas some amps, you know, you can ruin it by oversetting those things. With this, it's not wild. You can't put too much of anything in there. But anyway, I think overall, I could pick any of these four on any given day. I might have preferred the Fender or the Magnatone compared to the other two for this. But I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. What I'm going to do for the rest of the video, just a few minutes of editing the clips, splicing a few clips together of these so you can hear them back to back and see what you think. But yeah, let me know down in the comments if I keep the same 4 amps for the next video, what guitar would you be interested in, whether it was Telecasters, Strats, something else with humbuckers, P90s. If you know my channel, you'll know what sort of guitars I've got. So let me know down in the comments what you'd like to hear and if you want me to start doing pedals with them. But really, I want to create this load of videos for people who are looking between the sorts of amps that I own. I get a lot of questions. I can't answer all of them, especially when I've been, for a few years where I was releasing videos every week. I sort of was getting more questions from people on Instagram and via email. It slowed down a bit recently, but I thought now was time for me to just start putting out more content about the amps with different guitars. Anyway, yeah, that was a lot of fun. If I had to pick one of the 4 amps to keep, I can't. On any day, it could be any of them. So when I do get questions about which I prefer, it's a really hard one because they will do something slightly different. But we'll delve more into the differences in the next one. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.